safe and happy New Year.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Randall Carlisle.
And I'm Angela Storr. In less than an hour, we'll leave behind the 1980s and enter the 1990s. My, how time flies.
Sounds strange to say that. Before we do that, we have still got a little time left to look back at the decade. The 80s brought a lot of changes to Minnesota.
So put up your feet, get that party horn ready for midnight, and join us as we look at Minnesota milestones of the 1980s.
Thank you for joining us on this New Year's Eve. Feels strange to be here, doesn't it? If you take a moment to think about the 80s, there are certain events that we'll all remember for a very long time to come.
That's right. If I say the Twins and the World Series, you'll know what we mean. That's because these events sparked changes in our lives and in Minnesota, or perhaps marked them to become important additions to the history of Minnesota. Tonight, we're not going to just travel down memory lane.
That's right. We dug into our files to bring you the stories that we believe are real milestones for Minnesota. You'll see our reports the way they aired as Eyewitness News covered events like the Jordan sex abuse case in 1984, a case that changed the way we protect sexually abused children in Minnesota. We'll look at how labor relations have evolved in the state as we weathered some tense moments on the picket lines. You'll also see how politics have changed in this state, and we'll look at the two men who symbolize that.
There are lots of Minnesotans who put us on the map in the 80s. They showed us daring courage and adventurous spirit or just incredible talent. We'll look back at some of their accomplishments. We'll take a moment to look at some of the firsts that Minnesota can claim for its own. Plus, you'll see something Minnesotans never tire of seeing. We think it's one of the biggest highlights of the decade, an event that's had a lasting effect on all of us. Remember that like it was yesterday. But we begin tonight with a story about an event that essentially altered the way Minneapolis looks today.
Quite literally, everyone who was living in Minnesota at the time will remember this. It was Thanksgiving Day in 1982. Around 5 o'clock that evening, a fire in the old Donaldson's building in downtown Minneapolis. It quickly turned into the biggest fire in the history of the city. Reporter Dave Andrews probably had the best view of that huge fire that could be seen for miles around.
It began shortly after 5 o'clock, apparently inside the demolition site at the old Donaldson's building, and quickly raced out of control. Within 45 minutes, fire officials had called in 5 alarms and all off-duty firefighters. By 5:45, smoke and ashes were soaring hundreds of feet into the air. The flames lit up the nighttime sky, and the fire could be seen for miles. Flames spread to the adjoining Northwest Bank building at 6th and Marquette, and to the remaining half of the old Donaldson's building that has not yet been torn down. Deputy Fire Chief Marshal Bush said the flames spread too quickly to contain the fire to the demolition site.
What appeared to be an partially open fire door in the newer section of the old Donaldson building. It got in there on the 3rd floor, but we appear to have that pretty well knocked down now.
Are you concerned at all at this point about it spreading? There were a lot of sparks earlier in the fire.
Well, we've tried to have crews, what we could get available up on, try to check the roofs of the different buildings. And
what about the IDS complex?
The IDS complex we have right now, we have taken all the glass out of the skyway between the IDS and the Donaldson, the old Donaldson complex, and we have a what we call a deluge set up in there against those doors to prevent it from spreading.
Part of the northern wall of the Donaldson's building collapsed. There were reports of an explosion. Windows of the J.C. Penney's building across the street were blown out.
Right now there is only speculation about the cause of this blaze, but because it did break out in the portion of the Donaldson building that is being torn down, and because there apparently were no workers on the job today, arson is going to be looked into very carefully. This is Dave Andrews.
Boy, that's a fire that none of us will forget. Of course, you know the rest of the story. The Northwestern Bank building had to be destroyed. Now, Eyewitness News recorded the event with 5 cameras in strategic positions, one even inside the building. that fire left a huge hole in the ground. For several years, our reporters found themselves standing in front of it talking about future plans for the downtown.
This story isn't over. Most of Northwestern's employees will have to move their offices at least one more time.
Downtown has become stronger and healthier than ever.
Byron Barnett, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, Minneapolis.
Popular spot.
Yeah, it was. They don't have to stand there anymore, though. What makes this fire such a milestone event is that it spawned new retail business downtown. Gavaday Common fills that hole now.
In fact, it became the cornerstone of efforts to revitalize the downtown, and of course the skyline changed. This is how it looked as we entered the decade. The IDS was still the prominent feature. Today, you can see what is now called the Norwest Tower, which replaced the bank building that burned, and the other buildings that have given the skyline new dimension.
You and I have said many times it's a gorgeous downtown.
I love it.
Well, the modest skyline of a town some 30 miles south of the Twin Cities became a familiar sight to Channel 5 viewers during the 80s.
So did the faces of the townspeople and those involved in the Jordan sex abuse case in the 1983 and 84. There was Kathleen Morris, the Scott County attorney, who became more of a story herself than the case she tried to prosecute. James John Rudd, the only Jordan resident to be convicted among 24 who were accused of being involved in the alleged child sex abuse ring. Robert and Lois Bentz, who were the first and last to go to trial in the case, and Attorney General Hubert Humphrey, who led the investigation into the handling of the Jordan case. It was a case riddled with problems that took years to solve.
Charges against 23 people had to be dropped because state officials said the case was so mishandled it would be impossible to determine their guilt or innocence. And you can see the case falling apart in this next report we found in our files. On that day in 1984, the case against Robert and Lois Bentz was about to go to the jury for a verdict, and Pat Milan was there.
Robert and Lois Bentz may be the first of 25 defendants to go to trial in the Jordan sex ring case. But at times in the past month, it has been difficult to tell for sure just who is on trial here, the Bentzes or prosecutor Kathleen Morris. It has been a less than graceful effort for everyone involved.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
When photographers are not running into concrete pillars or one another, they are busy catching attorneys outside the Carver County Courthouse, accusing Scott County officials of everything from hiding police reports to brainwashing child victims who testified as eyewitnesses.
I'm not surprised about anything in this case. I don't think anything should surprise you about the way this case has been handled by the prosecution.
And the jousting continued inside, where Minnesota's unusually rigid rules of attorney behavior have been stretched to the max by the prosecution and the defense, shouting, hissing, and gasping at each other in front of the jury. The trial has been a test of some very strong personalities. When defense attorney Barry Voss heard that his car had been confiscated by the IRS for back taxes, he charged that Morris was behind the action, saying she'd do anything to upset the defense to win her case. But at this moment, it is prosecutor Kathleen Morris who is in more trouble than either Robert or Lois Bentz, because when the trial is over, the Bentzes could walk away as free people. But Judge Martin Mansour has promised to punish Morris for violating a sequestration order for witnesses. The Scott County prosecutor based her case almost solely on the words of children who took the stand. But there was even trouble there. For one little boy, Wednesday's revelation became Thursday's retraction. The child admitted during his second day on the stand that he lied. While the child maintained his story of being raped by both the Bentzes, he said the time, date, and place he testified about were lies. Kathleen Morris rarely cross-examined defense witnesses and will win or lose this case, depending almost completely on how much credibility the jurors will give to the horror stories the children have told about in court.
I guess I keep saying the children were the people that were there who were sexually abused, and it's time people started listening to them.
Pat Milan, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
Well, the jury didn't give much credibility to the children's testimony. They returned a not guilty verdict in the Bentz case. Charges against 22 other defendants were dismissed, and later that year there were efforts to remove Kathleen Morris from office. But a lot of good came out of the Jordan sex abuse case.
New legislation improved the protection of the rights of sexually abused children in Minnesota. From the ashes of the Jordan tragedy arose new programs like the Children's Resource Center in St. Paul and Hennepin County's Child Abuse Evaluation. Both programs programs have broken new ground as they develop new ways to deal with both the physical and psychological trauma of sexually abused kids. And that's what makes this story a real milestone for Minnesota.
And there are more Minnesota milestones to tell you about tonight.
A plane crash that changed the charter airline industry.
A double murder that showed tensions in rural Minnesota at their peak. And tensions on the picket line in Austin, Minnesota. These were familiar scenes on the news in the mid-'80s.
The 80s Minnesota Milestone is brought to you in part by the White Bear Auto Dealers. If you're buying a car, make a trip to the White Bear Auto Dealers. And by Levitt's. You'll love it at Levitt's.
From all over the world they come. Over 8,000 new and used automobiles to one Minnesota location for one mega sale. It's the White Bear Auto Dealers Holiday Sell-a-thon. 5,000 new vehicles by 25 different manufacturers and over 3,000 sale-priced used cars, trucks, and vans. Over 3 solid miles of cars in one easy location, and every one on sale. Highway 61 from 36 in Maplewood, north past 694. The White Bear Auto Dealers Worldwide Holiday Sell-a-thon. Don't miss it.
Everybody's celebrating Levitt's big New Year's Day sale. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's right. Kick off the new year with store-wide savings. Save on living rooms, dining rooms, bedrooms, chairs, bedding. Hundreds of items in Levitt's huge showrooms have been reduced, so don't miss Levitt's big New Year's Day sale. Remember, it's tomorrow only, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
You'll love it at Levitt's.
I'm so happy today.
What you need from a radio station changes depending on when it is, where you're headed, or what you're doing. And through the different times of your day, and the different places you have to stay, there's one radio station to turn to every step of the way. KS95 FM, the #1 music station under the sun, is 95 and sunny all day long. How can you keep up with the world of medicine? Watch The Health Capsule with Dr. Michael Breen, only on Eyewitness News, live at 5. It's your prescription for better health.
Welcome back to the 80s Minnesota Milestones, as we look at the events and the people that really created change in our state during the decade.
Unfortunately, some of those events were human tragedies. There were hard lessons to be learned from the many plane crashes in the 80s. Twice this decade, dozens of Minnesotans had died in big plane crashes. In August of 1987 in Detroit, more than 150 people died on Northwest Flight 255. The plane had plunged to the earth seconds after takeoff. A 4-year-old girl, Cecilia Sheehan, was the only survivor of that crash. Remember all the stories around the nation about her?
The one miracle of that tragedy. The fatal crash that shook the entire charter airlines industry occurred 2 years earlier. In Reno, Nevada, a chartered Lockheed Electra turboprop airliner crashed and burned on takeoff. The sole survivor was 17-year-old George Lamson, Jr. Reporter John Altenburn was there when the teenager described what happened when the plane went down.
George Lamson remembers a plane load of happy people boarding Flight 203, but just a few seconds later in the air, it all changed.
And we started going down, and the pilot said we're going down, and we just hit the ground pretty hard.
Lamson says it must have been his instinct to survive that dictated his actions in the last few seconds before the plane hit the ground.
I brought my legs up, and I covered up my head with my hands, and I was sitting right by a wall, so I kicked the wall while we hit the ground, so I was just sliding through and all this fire and debris, and then I realized I was outside, and I tried to get up, and I ripped off my seatbelt and ran.
George says he can remember something burning his face. He wondered for a moment if he was dead, and he just kept running towards approaching rescue crews. Lamson says he feels lucky to be one of the 3 survivors of the crash, although he says it hurts to remember the other passengers.
Yeah, I got to know everybody on the plane pretty much. We're all friends of my dad, and I got to know the people just by shaking their hands and talking with them. It was all right. They're really nice people. It's a shame that they had to die, though.
Doctors say George Lamson Jr. is making a good recovery. He could be out of the hospital in several days. His father, George Sr., remains in critical condition tonight with burns that are much more serious. John Altenburn, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
We have some footnotes about the Galaxy Airlines crash. George Lamson's father didn't make it. He died from his injuries, making George the sole survivor of the crash. Bill Sheridan, the man who owned Galaxy, lost his license to run the airlines. And for several years afterward, a congressional subcommittee held hearings that principally focused on the crash. Those sessions produced tighter rules and restrictions for charter airlines, making it safer for everyone to fly them. This next story strikes at the very heart of rural Minnesota.
The 80s will always be remembered among farmers as a time of crisis. Many of them pooled together to gain the strength to stop foreclosures that a poor farm economy was dictating. Now, in March of 1985, in a small Minnesota town, farmers blocked the pathway of the county sheriff to stop the sale of a farm.
No sale! No sale! No sale! We feel we have to make a stand or we won't be anybody left.
22 people were arrested at that protest, but they did manage to stop the foreclosure and save the Jim Langman farm for a little while. The ups and downs of the farm crisis could be seen often on Eyewitness News throughout the mid-80s, but the milestone event that showed the crisis at its breaking point was the murder of two bankers in Ruthton, Minnesota. It was an act of revenge for farmer James Jenkins and his 18-year-old son, Steve. The Buffalo Ridge State Bank had repossessed the family farm, and father and son reacted by shooting the bank's top two executives to death. Well, after a massive manhunt, authorities finally caught up with the two in Paducah, Texas. Young Steve Jenkins turned himself into police and told them his father was about to commit suicide. Reporter Dave Andrews traveled to Texas to get the story.
This small county jailhouse here in Paducah, Texas, now houses the only remaining suspect in last Thursday's double murders in southwestern Minnesota. 18-year-old Stephen Jenkins walked into the county jail here last night and gave himself up, ending one of the biggest manhunts in recent years in Minnesota. Cottle County Sheriff Frank Taylor arrested Jenkins after Jenkins told him he and his father were wanted for murder.
But he just more or less turned himself in, said he was tired of running and wanted to turn himself in. And he indicated that he left his father out here at a farm about 4 miles north of Paducah. And he was fearful that his father was going to kill himself, so we taken the boy with us in the car, and he went back and showed us the farm where they were at out there. And as we drove up to the farm, we found his father laying in the road, and he had apparently shot himself with a 12-gauge shotgun.
Authorities here seized weapons and ammunition from Jenkins. Jenkins told police last night it was his father, and not he, who shot and killed the two Ruthton bankers last Thursday. When Steve Jenkins turned himself in to authorities here in Paducah, Texas last night, he was driving this truck, the very same truck that he and his father were seen speeding away in following the murders on Thursday. He told authorities here that he and his father were able to cover the 900 or so miles to Texas by driving on back roads during daylight hours and hiding out overnight. Today, Jenkins was arraigned, bond posted at $100,000. He also waived extradition and agreed to voluntarily return to Minnesota. Minnesota officials who arrived in Paducah tonight plan to transport the 18-year-old murder suspect back to Lincoln County tomorrow. Dave Andrews, Channel 5 Eyewitness News in Paducah, Texas.
Dave Andrews was a busy reporter in the 80s as well. Footnote to all this, Steve Jenkins returned to Minnesota to stand trial. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
It was a violent act that many farmers said they could understand, and the town of Ruthton grieved for the Jenkins as well as to the two bankers they killed.
Now, here's another story that evoked sympathy from union workers for a long time. The Hormel strike in Austin. We'll relive some of those tense moments on the picket line coming up.
And we'll talk about the two men who symbolized Minnesota politics for the 80s.
What do you say to mustard, to barbecue? What do you say to spinach, to chili, to grass? Let the protein power of Era do the talking. And when stains come calling, you can say, scram, beat it, get lost, take a hike, you're out of here. And if you show your ugly face again, you'll get more of the same. Era reigns over stains.
It's my favorite store. It's the only store, and I will go to any store if it's Marshall's.
Men's and ladies' winter jackets that regularly sell in department stores for $60 to $110 have just arrived at Marshall's. For a price that's pure Marshall's, an incredible $29.99.
No, that's even better than I expected.
Wait, there's Marshall's red sticker clearance. Take an additional 25% off all red sticker prices now through Tuesday.
I love it.
Marshalls, the first name and brand names for less.
A cruise on Norwegian Cruise Line can do wonders for your memory. You'll forget just about everything. Norwegian Cruise Line, the world's best way to disconnect the world.
Call Hobbit Travel, the leaders in special cruise prices starting as low as $3.99 per person. That's Hobbit Travel, the experts in cruise and vacation savings.
Hi kids, I'm Mark Curtis, and I've got great news. You can join the Minnesota Timberwolves Breakfast Club just for kids. When you join, you get all of this great stuff, plus more surprises for members only. To find out how to join, call 337-DUNK. That's 337-DUNK. The Timberwolves Breakfast Club is sponsored by General Mills, the American Dairy Association, and all of your friends here at Channel 5. Join the Timberwolves Breakfast Club today. It'll be great.
How's it feel, Kathy? How's it feel, Kathy? How's it feel? I got kids too. You ain't keeping that job. We're gonna win this fight. We're gonna win this fight. Kathy, you ain't got no job. Take it away from my kids too, Kathy.
Those pictures bring it all back. Local P9, the Hormel plant, and the gates outside that were under siege for so long.
The Austin strike symbolized labor struggles in the state during the decade. There was the feeling of hopelessness on the Iron Range when reserve mining closed and hundreds of jobs were lost. And this year, we all watched the tensions rise at the Boise Cascade plant in International Falls when plant officials hired non-union workers to expand the paper mill.
But nothing matched the longevity, the bitterness that characterized the strike at Hormel. Union rallies, the National Guard, tainted Hormel products. They were all part of the dispute that lasted for more than a year. And all of Minnesota watched as the numbers of workers on the picket line dropped slowly from the hundreds to just a handful by the strike's end. Now, a number of our reporters covered the strike, but no one knows the story better than our Kevin Berger, who filed stories from beginning to end on the Hormel strike. Kevin gave this report 7 months into the strike when things took a nasty turn.
It was a day marked with intensity, anger, and hostility. Striking P9 members were as vocal as ever, but today it went beyond that. There was spitting as cars full of workers arrived at the barricaded plant. They taunted police officers, aggressively resisted arrest, and circled a police van that was ready to hold protesters.
Pull some of these people down.
A tow truck that arrived to move vehicles blocking the gate was kicked. Then a man who tried to stop the action had to be forcibly removed. A windshield was broken out as the two sides clashed. P9 members say replacement workers threatened them.
We just followed a couple people, and they pulled into a driveway, and they just pulled out a rifle on us.
While the crowd here was busy with police and arrests, replacement workers were entering another gate. P9 members rushed to the area. Rocks were thrown, but the workers inside just jeered.
As you mentioned before, there were several points during the morning when it could have been lost just because someone slipped and fell or someone threw something or something else. Then the whole thing could have gone down the drain rapidly.
As far as I'm concerned, I've reached the point where if we're going down the tube, I'll take them and the whole damn town of Austin down with us because I don't think any of them have backed us.
Kevin Berger, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
What a time that was. Hormel company leaders did settle the strike with P9ers, but the dispute left deep emotional wounds that are taking a long time to heal. In fact, Hormel leaders just recently decided to return its annual stockholders meeting to Austin in January for the very first time since that strike.
Other Minnesota companies have been forced to fight battles of a different kind in the 80s.
3 companies in particular have fought the takeover battle.
Northwest Airlines and Dayton Hudson have both been targets, but perhaps the biggest Minnesota loss happened when Britain's Grand Metropolitan Company bought Pillsbury. Pillsbury officials did their best to fend off the takeover, even going so far as to put the boxing gloves on the doughboy himself. But 3 months after Grand Met's first buyout offer, Pillsbury stockholders finally agreed to sell. Immediately, there were concerns that hundreds of jobs would be cut, and the company's long-standing tradition of charitable giving would cease. Reporter Lou Harvin was there when the first prediction came true.
It was a day employees say they knew was coming. This time, however, they would find out the names of those who would be without a job. Pat Bartlett carried out his belongings, taking with him 27 years at Pillsbury in marketing. Shannon Chrisman left early today with all her things, laid off after 2 years on the job. And Sue Rossau will be giving up 9 years here, told her services no longer needed. Are employees bitter? Some are, but many share Pat Bartlett's view.
I'm not bitter about it. I think it's a thing where they're trying to cut costs, and I think that, you know, as an owner of a company, they've got the right to do that.
But after 27 years?
Well, that's the tough part. I'm going to miss a lot of my friends, but I think, you know, I expected to retire here because I liked my job and I liked what I did, but in honesty, they've been fair to me.
Meanwhile, many employees immediately headed over to this job placement service. Pillsbury is trying to help them find new positions. They'll also be offering 2 months severance plus several weeks' pay, depending on years of service. Shannon Chrisman sees continued unrest here at Pillsbury.
You probably see more people leaving on their own free will, looking for other jobs, but...
Just because they're scared?
Yeah, they're tired of all the changes.
Meanwhile, one employee who was not laid off today said he's not even sure whether to be happy. He says the biggest problem is not being certain about his future. In Minneapolis, Lou Harvin, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
550 or 23% of Pillsbury's Minnesota employees lost their jobs that day last March. It was a move analysts said would save the company millions of dollars, and maybe it did. Just recently, Grand Met reported record profits for Pillsbury, silencing critics who said Grand Met couldn't make Pillsbury profitable.
Well, shall we turn to politics now? Minnesota also made news this decade when one of its native sons made a bid for the highest office in the land, the office of president. Walter Mondale followed in the steps of the late Hubert Humphrey to become the second Minnesotan to capture his party's presidential nomination.
I believe it's time for new leadership. It's time for America to move on. Thank you very much.
That new leadership was to include the first woman vice president, Geraldine Ferraro. The Mondale-Ferraro ticket lost to President Reagan in the 1984 November election, but they did win the electoral votes of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. While Mondale didn't achieve his political goals, another Minnesotan managed to return to the office he had held in the 70s. Rudy Perpich became Minnesota's governor in 1983, even though he had not been endorsed by DFLers for the seat. And he began to put his personal stamp on the decade from the very start with a non-traditional inauguration. Reporter Lindsay Strand followed Perpich to his hometown of Hibbing.
Rudy Perpich returned to his alma mater, the Hibbing High School, to take his oath of office. He greeted dozens of former teachers who came back to school for the day, many of them in their 90s. And he lunched with students in the school cafeteria, trying to keep a New Year's resolution to lose the weight he gained during the campaign. Perpich ate lightly, soup and 2 desserts, but dessert today was just sliced peaches. Inside the elaborately decorated school auditorium, Perpich was sworn in. His wife Lola held the Bible as Associate Justice Rosemary Wall administered the oath. Wall, the first woman on the Supreme Court, was appointed by Perpich during his first term. He chose to take the oath away from the state capitol because he wanted a less formal environment and wanted to underscore the needed changes he sees in education. Perpich urged parents to take a more active role in their children's education. He called for more consolidation of school administration, questioning the need for 435 districts, each with their own superintendents and bookkeeping departments.
Aren't there ways to reduce administrative costs to free up money for language teachers or computers or science? Being literate in English language is not enough today. Our goal should be to graduate students with at least one foreign language and fluency in the language of the computer. Schools must come into the computer age. I know that many schools have their IBMs and their Apples and their control datas, but many others do not, and that is unforgivable.
Having already named all of his cabinet members at a record pace, Perpich says he can now concentrate on trying to turn the state's economy around and will deliver his State of the State address on Wednesday. There were many firsts at this inauguration. Perpich is the first governor to serve non-consecutive terms and the first to be sworn in away from the state capitol. He'll be serving with the state's first lieutenant governor that is a woman, all setting the tone for what Perpich hopes will be an innovative 4 years. In Hibbing, I'm Lindsay Strand, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Well, the governor has had a lot of ups and downs since then, including the recent flap over the governor's mansion.
That's right, but he has decided to run again, going for another term in office.
We'll have to wait till next year to find out about that. You know, the Perpich election symbolized a break from traditional party politics in Minnesota and a move toward more of an individualized style of politics and leadership, and that really is a milestone for a state like Minnesota where the party has always been so strong.
When we come back, we'll look at some Minnesota firsts. We'll relive the moments as a human heart was rushed to the first female artificial heart patient. We'll show you a Minnesota first that dramatically changed the way you get your news every day. And later, we'll look back at our #1 champs in '87, the Minnesota Twins.
This car will be the new #1.
Come on. The Hyundai Excel has been the best-selling import for 3 years. Almost 800,000 on the road.
Time for a change of scenery. This gem has 20% more power. There's more room inside and all new styling.
Is this the new Excel?
She's quick. This is the all-new 1990 Excel, and it's at your Hyundai dealer right now.
Starting at just $61.94?
Yeah.
I hate it when he's right.
Cash rebates will save you hundreds on all new Excels through January 3rd. See your dealer for details.
It's out with the old
and in with the new
as we celebrate 90 with upbeat savings at Mills Fleet Farm.
Shop Fleet Farm and give your home a whole new up-tempo look.
For less.
Save on this beautiful bedroom grouping from Armstrong Furniture featuring a stain-resistant, realistic oak finish.
Choose from the 5-drawer chest, 6-drawer chest, headboard, nightstand, or the mirror.
Buy them together or separately. They're all on sale now at super low prices.
So don't miss a beat.
Take note and shop now for upbeat savings as we celebrate 90 at Mills Fleet Farm.
Tommy Kramer from Southdale Ford talking about the F-150 XLT Lariat 4x4.
DK, what are you doing?
I'm doing a commercial.
You don't see me playing quarterback. Besides, what do you know about an F-150?
I know that there are more than 20 on the lot, and that this one only costs $13,100 or $223 a month.
I suppose there's no payments on $19.95.
Not until April of 1990.
But you know a number.
What number?
The number you call. 835-5555.
My favorite targets are waste, fraud, and abuse.
10 Emmy Awards for reporting excellence.
I love shining a light on the bad guys and watching them scurry away like roaches.
Broke the shocking story of the Willowbrook Hospital scandal.
Helping people, fighting for the underdog. It's a great job.
The Peabody Award for distinguished journalism.
TV doesn't have to be boring to get the job done.
Reporting from 60 countries and 12 wars.
When I do a story, I take it as far as it goes.
Watch Geraldo weekdays at 4 here on Channel 5.
Ever go home at night and say to yourself or to your wife or your family, say, I bit off more than I can chew?
No.
No?
Not at all.
Never
I've never had
mind.
that feeling. No.
Well, you've never given up on anything in your life, really.
Yeah, well, it's not too tough. And if anybody has a feeling that it's too tough, I think they have the wrong vision.
He was an impressive man. I remember so well the day I talked with the late Richard Green. It was exactly 1 year after he had arrived in New York City to be their school chancellor.
That was after Green had spent 8 years as the first black school superintendent in Minneapolis. You may remember in 1982, Green made a very controversial decision that received national attention at the time, the decision to close 18 Minneapolis schools because of dropping enrollment. He went on to put his mark on public education in Minneapolis and on Minnesota by bringing pioneering programs to the school system. Green went on to become the chancellor of New York City Public Schools, and he died last spring of a fatal asthma attack.
Which was too bad because he was just beginning to leave his mark on the school system, and he died at a young age. Another Minnesotan set an example for us all this decade by her courage and bravery. You may remember the story of Mary Lund, the first woman to receive an artificial heart. That was in December of 1985. 11 months later, she died, but she had led the way for other women like her who need artificial hearts to survive. Her husband, Dwayne, talked to reporters on the day she died.
Throughout these months, Mary has
been courageous and strong. By example, she taught many, many people about patience and bravery.
Now, the artificial heart transplant made medical history, but the excitement continued when surgeons replaced it with a human heart at Abbott Northwestern Hospitals in Minneapolis. The heart donor was a 14-year-old Montana girl who had died in an accident. Dr. Michael Breen was there when the heart was rushed to Mary Lund.
The donor for the transplant was a 14-year-old Montana girl who died yesterday in this Billings hospital. The decision to donate Gina Fauché's heart was made by her mother.
And Gina was a very loving child, and I thought it was so good that something good could come out of this tragedy.
By 10 p.m. yesterday, tests on Gina showed the antibodies in Mary Lund's blood probably wouldn't attack the donor heart. By 3 a.m., the transplant team from Minneapolis had arrived at Billings. The team supervised the donor heart's removal. They packed it in a blue box that looks like a cooler, and finally took an ambulance to a waiting jet. At 8 a.m., while that jet was in the air, Mary Lund was taken to the operating room and her chest was opened up. The jet arrived at Home and Field in St. Paul at 10:50, at which point the transport team rushed to a waiting helicopter. While they were boarding the helicopter, Mrs. Lund's surgeons, in preparation for the new heart, removed her artificial heart. The mechanical device had kept Mrs. Lund alive for 43 days. At 11:07, the helicopter arrived at the roof of Abbott Northwestern. It was immediately taken to the operating room. The heart was put in Mrs. Lund's chest just 3 hours after its removal in Billings. The operation was over by about 3 p.m.
The entire surgical procedure on Mrs. Lund went very well. The artificial heart did not complicate the transplant procedure.
Dr. Van Tassel says everyone has been amazed at Mrs. Lund's courage and strength.
This position was unbelievable for somebody who had been bedridden and had an artificial heart for that period of time. It was quite remarkable. I think that, again, this is speculation, as you might expect, but I think that Mary has a possible chance of having a near normal life.
I'm Dr. Michael Breen, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Lund's operations led the way for others. You might remember Nicole Christopherson from Minot, North Dakota. She became the second person to receive an artificial heart at Abbott Northwestern Hospital, and that was in the fall of 1986. And there were other Minnesota firsts in the 80s.
We can boast of the first microwave popcorn invented in Golden Valley.
I'm glad they did that.
And of the fastest supercomputers to date manufactured by Cray Research here in Minnesota. And there's one innovation that we are particularly proud of here at KSTP TV. We were the first television station in the country to bring you the news with a portable satellite unit, or News Star as we call it. This new technology changed the television industry, making it possible for the first time for television stations to cover events live, wherever they happened in the country and even overseas. Our first live satellite report came from the site of an important trial in Ivanhoe, Minnesota in April 1984. We sent media commentator Michael Boyle along to herald its arrival.
The big victory, of course, for Mondale was that he escaped defeat here tonight.
Live satellite news reports are a familiar sight on local TV newscasts, but until now, many stories from locations like tonight's coverage of the Jenkins court proceedings could not be broadcast live because the equipment necessary was either not available in remote areas like Ivanhoe or too costly to be practical. A new piece of mobile equipment has changed all that.
Okay, we want to go to 105 West. Okay, roll it around. Looking good.
This 2.4-meter satellite uplink dish being used tonight for the first time on an American news program is an entirely portable unit that makes it possible to broadcast live from any location in the United States. For example, right now it's parked adjacent to the courthouse where the Jenkins trial is taking place. Tonight's report was transmitted directly from this compact unit to an orbiting satellite and then to KSTP's studios in the Twin Cities. Usually, satellited news reports are sent on much larger fixed uplink dishes, like this 11-meter one, with limited satellite access time. The new portable uplink unit significantly expands KSTP TV's live capability, which had been limited to action cam.
Well, with an action cam truck, we are pretty much limited to 25 or 30-mile radius of the Twin Cities. With our transportable earth station, we can go virtually anywhere in North America and park the truck and get a signal back to the station.
In essence, this new satellite uplink serves as a portable news bureau, providing KSTP TV with the flexibility to bring you important stories live from any location where news is being made. In Ivanhoe, Minnesota, I'm Michael Boyle, your KSTP TV media commentator.
It's nice to have the new technology. I can still remember when we were covering news stories on film.
All right, then you got to process it and splice it.
Takes forever.
Nothing live at all.
Newstar has made a world of difference for us. Just think of all the places from which we've been able to bring you live pictures.
This year alone, we've seen live scenes from earthquake-stricken San Francisco, even all the way to the Berlin Wall in Europe.
That's right. And in other years, as far as Resolute in the Northwest Territories. In fact, the most northern live satellite report ever done in North America.
Now we take it all for granted, don't we? Minnesota has an awful lot to be proud of.
Not only did we have a lot of Minnesota firsts, but there are a number of Minnesotans who put us on the map during the decade, and through their talents and courage made their mark. Their stories in a moment.
From all over the world they come. Over 8,000 new and used automobiles to one Minnesota location for one mega sale. It's the White Bear Auto Dealers Holiday Sell-a-thon. 5,000 new vehicles by 25 different manufacturers and over 3,000 sale-priced used cars, trucks, and vans. Over 3 solid miles of cars in one easy location, and every one on sale. Highway 61 from 36 in Maplewood, north past 694. The White Bear Auto Dealers Worldwide Holiday Sell-a-thon. Don't miss it.
Everybody's celebrating Levitt's big New Year's Day sale. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's right. Kick off the new year with store-wide savings. Save on living rooms, dining rooms, bedrooms, chairs, bedding. Hundreds of items in Levitt's huge showrooms have been reduced, so don't miss Levitt's big New Year's Day sale. Remember, it's tomorrow only, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
You'll love it at Levitt's.
Sometimes we all need a friend to talk to.
And now there's a phone number for you to call when you need to talk to that certain someone.
Anytime, 24 hours a day. Perhaps you're looking for advice or a woman's point of view.
Or maybe you just need to hear a soft, smiling voice. This is one-to-one conversation, and it's live.
Let me be your friend on the other end.
1989. Eyewitness News was working to bring you closer to your world. Eyewitness News went to the Soviet Union so you could share the trip of a lifetime with some local students. Eyewitness News took you to Poland when Walter Mondale went to help them change their government. Eyewitness News traveled to East Germany so you could experience the emotions of victory as the Berlin Wall crumbled. So as you look for news coverage in the 90s, depend on Eyewitness News here on Minnesota's News Channel, Channel 5.
It was a moment for Minnesota history books. Minnesotan Will Steger and his team of explorers unfurled the American flag at the North Pole. What a sight that was. They had traveled all the way there by dog sled on a long, grueling journey.
That was March 3rd, 1986, and our own Jason Davis was there to record the historic moment, as well as other moments for these Minnesotans who have put us on the map. The decade's list of adventures begin in 1981 when Jerry Speece, a native of White Bear Lake, set out in June to cross the Pacific Ocean. He managed beautifully in his 10-foot sloop Yankee Girl. Speece sailed to Sydney, Australia, where he landed in November. In 1986, another sailor, Mike Plant of Wayzata, set off to sail 27,000 miles around the world in a race with 34 others and returned in time to win his class. And there were 2 artists who made their mark on Minnesota history. Playwright August Wilson of St. Paul won a Pulitzer Prize in 1987 for his works that explore the Black experience. And Pinchas Zuckerman, for 7 years, he worked as music director of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, turning it into a world-class orchestra. The chamber made 9 major recordings under his leadership and brought weekly radio broadcasts to Minnesotans. But the man we want to highlight tonight probably brought Minnesota to more people across the country than anyone else.
I wonder if anybody can guess who he is. He's, of course, Garrison Keillor of Prairie Home Companion fame. And yes, he left Minnesota, but his tales of Lake Wobegon, the town that time forgot, have made the good life in our state rather famous. In 1985, he took his popular radio show on tour while the World Theater was being remodeled. Reporter Kevin Berger caught up with him in Milwaukee.
When the desert sun goes down.
Garrison Keillor and the musicians in his company tuned up at rehearsal this afternoon. Yes, that's Chet Atkins picking guitar. He's part of the touring troupe, and the tour begins tonight. The Prairie Home Companion Company will be traveling far from Lake Wobegon in coming weeks. They'll be in Louisiana and Wyoming and Hawaii, but there's no place like home.
I look forward to being back in St. Paul.
Garrison Keillor is anxious to return to his beloved World Theater at the first of the year.
I think it's good for the show to have a base, to have a home. And I find as I travel around that people, while they are glad to have us come and do the show in their area, they really do think of this show as a show that originates from St. Paul, Minnesota, a city that many of them have never seen.
Keillor hasn't seen much of St. Paul himself lately. He's been on a national tour promoting his book. He's getting attention and even adulation, but he says he's not getting carried away.
When this show is over, I still have to go back to St. Paul, and I still have to rake my front yard. I have 3 oak trees on my property, and they produce, between the 3 of them, about 12% of the leaves in municipal St. Paul.
For the Eyewitness News Update, I'm Kevin Berger.
He is not raking those leaves in St. Paul anymore. Now, if you turn on the radio on a Saturday, you will find Keillor doing a similar version of Prairie Home Companion, but it's from New York City. Now, Garrison Keillor also did one more thing for Minnesota that we'd like to mention tonight.
Yes, he invented something called the Minnesota Mouth-Off. Once a year, people could take to the stage and play their mouths. Here's the sample. Not bad. When we come back, another Minnesota milestone, the day our team became the world champions.
Fight on your hands. Choose your weapon carefully.
Friends, our after Christmas sale is going on for 5 days only right here at Viking Chevrolet in downtown Friendly. With over $5 million worth of new cars and trucks, it must be so regardless of profit. Of course, you can get as low as 6.9% financing or up to $1,500 in factory rebates. It's a brand new 1990 Chevrolet S10 pickup and a brand new 1990 Chevrolet Cavalier. You come on over here. You take your pick. After rebate, only $7,988, only $139 a month. See you here at Viking.
LensCrafters presents another breakthrough, new featherweight lenses.
Little Donnie's glasses are so clunky, he needs a new pair. Hey, they're cool.
There are new featherweight lenses. Featherweight lenses, lighter, slimmer, and oh so comfortable. Available only from LensCrafters in-store labs in about an hour. New featherweights.
You can hardly tell I got them on.
For all your eyewear needs, LensCrafters custom-crafted eyeglasses in about an hour.
6 locations, including Suburban Square.
One of the proudest days for Minnesota was in 1987, and we don't really have to explain these pictures, do we? It was the day Minnesota saluted its #1 champion Twins.
Doesn't take a lot of explanation. It was definitely a highlight. You can see and feel the excitement on that day. The decade is full of memories for sports fans, and we're going to look at a few of them. Probably one of the saddest days for some baseball fans, the Met Stadium in Bloomington was torn down in the early 80s. And it was soon replaced by the Hubert Humphrey Metrodome in downtown Minneapolis. The dome had its problems in the beginning. One moment the dome was inflated, and the next it wasn't.
Horse racing came to Minnesota in the 80s at Canterbury Downs in Shakopee. The track drew Minnesotans and visitors anxious to place their first bet in 1985. And of course, this year we've gotten our first glimpse of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are waiting for their new basketball arena. But we thought it would be appropriate to end the decade and end our look at Minnesota's milestones tonight to relive some of the moments of the World Series win.
You can't argue that that's definitely a highlight. And we looked through so many tapes, it was hard to choose from all the reports we did at that time. But this one we think you'll enjoy the most.
Reporter Mike Binkley filed this report after he experienced Twins fever at its peak.
Beyond Thunderdome came Thunder Alley. Fans took hold of the streets and wouldn't let go. They were surfing on a nearby van, spraying beer from the tops of streetlights.
I don't think we do it. We're number one. We are number one. Number one. Are we number one? We're number one.
It was still a little hard to believe, but there it was in lights, the world champion Minnesota Twins.
I can't describe it. It's absolutely the best thing that ever happened to Minneapolis. The people and the animals didn't want to leave. The partying went on past one. It's history, man. It's just history. This is history here today.
Any cars that tried to make it through this gridlock were rocked feverishly by a gauntlet of pounding, delirious fans. And the madness of the moment had left Homer hankies in shreds.
It's shocked. But it's worth every minute. Every minute. I love it. Good wins. Good.
It spread to many corners of downtown Minneapolis. Here at 7 Corners, people offered Cardinal champagne for sale. Cheap, cheap. And women waved hankies from above.
They said we couldn't do it. And we did it.
Forget the Clydesdales. When you say Twins fever, you've said it all. Mike Binkley, Eyewitness News, live at 5.
What a great line. I'm surprised that Mike lived through that night.
I bet he had a lot of fun covering it. Yes. Everybody was busy back then.
Just think of all the things we gained in our lives when the Twins won. Homer hankies, dome dogs, and the Baron Gare boogie.
Lots of important things, huh? Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope the Twins can win the World Series again in the 90s. That'd be great.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
We're just a couple of minutes away from midnight now, so we can say goodbye to the 80s.
Everybody have your noisemakers ready. Fun time to party. You know, there's always a point of contention whether the decade really ends numerically or by the events of the decade. I guess there's merit to both sides. In any case, we want to thank you for joining us for our look at Minnesota Milestones.
We'd like to leave you with one last look at the decade and the names of the Eyewitness News staff, all of whom have worked very hard to bring you the news in the past 10 years.
And we want you to stay tuned for the Channel 5 countdown to the 90s. That sounds weird to say. Have a great evening.
Good night.
A Milestone was brought to you in part by Levitt's. You'll love it at Levitt's. And by the White Bear Auto Dealers. If you're buying a car, make a trip to the White Bear Auto Dealers.
The tragic. The heroic.
What's going on? You got a knife! Your brothers? No, the guy!
I'm just glad we're all alive.
The sensational. The original. The best. A current affair.
Weeknights at 6:30 here on Channel 5.
As the 80s fade into history, those of us at Channel 5 look forward to bringing you eyewitness news in the 90s.
We've just taken a nostalgic look back, and with a world that's changing right before our eyes, it's on to the 90s with great hope for the future. And from all of us at Channel 5, Happy New Year!
Right now at Inver Grove Ford and Southview Chevrolet, we're going indoors for our giant one-day used car and truck sale.
Monday only. Buy this 85 Tempo 2688, an 87 Taurus 3888, or an 88 Ranger 4888 at Inver Grove Ford or at Southview Chevrolet.
This 89 Spectrum 5666. This 89 Le Mans 6366. This 84 Nissan 4x4 3966. Our giant indoor used car and truck sale Monday only, New Year's Day only.
At Inver Grove Ford and Southview Chevrolet, I-494 in South Robert.
You've got company coming. It's Good Company with Steve Edelman and Sharon Anderson. Weekday afternoons, it's just like visiting with good friends on the Twin Cities' only local magazine show. You'll see stars and style, fitness and fashion. There's Gary Lumpkin to make you smile, and Mike Brunswick stories to touch your heart. You've got company coming. Enjoy Good Company, weekdays at 3 only on Channel 5. Channel 5 wishes you a safe and happy New Year.